That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp asphalt and distant rain, the kind of gray dawn that clings to a small town like regret. Main Street in Eldridge was quiet, save for the occasional rumble of a delivery truck fading into the haze. Folks hurried along the sidewalks, collars turned up against the chill, eyes fixed on their own hurried steps. No one noticed the woman at first, not until she stumbled out of the alley beside the old pharmacy, her coat flapping like a broken wing. She was in her late 40s, maybe, with lines etched deep around her eyes from years of unseen burdens. Her name was Elena, though no one there knew it yet. She clutched a worn purse to her chest, as if it held the last piece of her world, and then her knees buckled. The collapse was sudden, silent, a crumple against the curb, her body folding like a shadow caught in the wind. Her head hit the pavement with a dull thud that echoed only in the minds of those who finally looked. A paper bag slipped from her grasp, spilling apples across the street, red skins rolling into puddles. Passers-by slowed, but no one moved closer. A man in a flannel shirt glanced her way, muttered something about calling an ambulance, but kept walking toward his shop. An older woman with a grocery cart paused, her lips pressing into a thin line, then shook her head and shuffled on. The town had seen its share of hard luck, folks down on their knees from the factory closures, the endless winters. But helping, that was for someone else. Elena lay there, chest rising in shallow breaths, a faint wheeze escaping her lips like a plea swallowed by the morning fog. From the edge of town, the low growl of engines cut through the quiet. Two bikers from the Ironhawks rolled in on their Harleys, the machines purring like loyal hounds after a long night on the highway. Jax led the way, his broad frame hunched over the handlebars, leather vest patched with the club's emblem, a weathered hawk in flight. At 42, he'd seen enough miles to know the road didn't forgive weakness, but it also didn't turn away from those who fell. Behind him rode Marco, younger by a decade, his face shadowed under a bandana, eyes sharp from the kind of life that taught you to spot trouble before it spotted you. They were heading to the garage on the outskirts, just another stop in their circuit of dusty towns and forgotten highways. The bikes slowed as they crested the rise onto Main Street, tires humming over the cracked pavement. Jax spotted her first. The woman crumpled there, alone amid the scattering crowd. His hand tightened on the throttle, a flicker of something old and raw stirring in his chest. He'd lost his sister years back to a similar indifference, a hospital bed too far and a system that looked the other way. Marco pulled up beside him, killing the engine with a flick of his wrist. The sudden silence amplified everything. The distant honk of a car, the rustle of leaves in the gutter, Elena's labored breathing. "You see that?" Marco said, his voice low, gravelly from cigarettes and wind. He swung a leg over the bike, boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. Jax nodded, already striding forward, his shadow falling long across the street. The onlookers parted like mist, their stares turning wary at the sight of the two men in leather and chains. Whispers rippled. Trouble, outsiders, the kind of folks who brought storms instead of shelter. A shopkeeper lingered in his doorway, hand hovering near his phone, ready to dial if things turned. No one trusted the Ironhawks here. They were the ghosts on the edge of town, riders who kept to themselves, fueling rumors of bar fights and midnight runs. But Jax didn't see the judgment. He saw only the woman, her face pale against the gray concrete, fingers twitching faintly. He knelt beside her, the knees of his jeans grinding into the grit. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" His voice was steady, roughened by years of shouting over engines, but there was a gentleness in it, like the hush after a storm. Elena's eyes fluttered, unfocused, her lips parting in a gasp. Marco scanned the crowd, his stance protective, arms crossed to ward off any interference. "Ambulance," he called out, his tone brooking no argument. "Someone call a damn ambulance." A few heads nodded, phones finally emerging, but the hesitation lingered, thick as the fog. Jack slipped off his jacket, folding it carefully under her head to cushion the cold stone. The leather smelled of oil and open road, a faint warmth seeping into her skin. He checked her pulse. Weak, thready. His calloused fingers gentle against her wrist. Memories flooded him unbidden. His sister's hand in his, cold in that sterile room. The doctor's shrugs. Not again. Not if he could help it. Marco crouched on her other side, his eyes darting to the spilled apples, then back to her face. "Hang on," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "We've got you." The wail of sirens pierced the air minutes later, but in that suspended moment, the street felt smaller, the world narrowing to the three of them. Elena's hand stirred, brushing Jax's arm, a silent acknowledgement amid the haze of pain. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of lights and urgency, pushing through the crowd that now watched with a mix of curiosity and shame. Jax and Marco stepped back, but not far. Their presence a quiet anchor as she was lifted onto the stretcher. As the ambulance doors swung shut, Jax met Marco's gaze over the rooftop. No words needed. The Brotherhood spoke in looks, in the shared weight of what they'd just done. The town would talk, of course, how the Rough Riders had swooped in where good folks hadn't. But for Jax, it was simpler. A line drawn in the dust, a promise kept to the invisible code that bound them. The engines roared back to life, carrying them toward the garage, but the morning had shifted. What began as a collapse on a forgotten street was only the spark, igniting questions that would burn through the days ahead. In Eldridge, the garage was a sanctuary of sorts, a squat brick building on the town's frayed edge, ringed by chain link and the skeletons of half-repaired bikes. Tools clattered inside, oil stains mapping the concrete like old scars. The Iron Hawks gathered there between runs, a loose family of misfits who'd found purpose in the hum of pistons and the loyalty of the ride. Jax wiped his hands on a rag, the scent of gasoline sharp in his nostrils, but his mind lingered on the woman, on the fragility he'd touched that morning. Marco leaned against a workbench, cracking open a soda, the fizz cutting the quiet. "Think she'll make it?" he asked, voice laced with the uncertainty they both felt. Jax shrugged, but his eyes were distant, staring at the rain-slicked road beyond the open bay door. "Doesn't matter if she does or not. We were there." It was truth. Plain as the ink on his arms, reminders of battles fought and losses carried. The club wasn't about glory, it was about showing up when the world turned its back. Little did they know, Elena's story was woven deeper into their own, threads of past pain pulling tight. But that morning, as the first drops of rain pattered on the tin roof, it was enough to have acted. The road stretched on, unforgiving. But in moments like these, it bent toward something human. The rain picked up as Jax and Marco settled into the garage, a steady drum against the corrugated roof that mirrored the unease settling in Jax's gut. He tossed the rag onto the workbench, the fabric landing with a soft slap amid the clutter of wrenches and half-empty oil cans. The space smelled of metal and damp earth, a familiar tang that grounded him after the chaos of the street. But today, it felt heavier, like the air before a storm that wouldn't break clean. Old Man Harlan, the garage's grizzled owner and a nominal affiliate of the Iron Hawks, shuffled in from the back office, his limp more pronounced in the chill. He'd ridden with them in his younger days, back when the club was just a handful of vets piecing together lives shattered by sand and shrapnel. Now, at 65, he stuck to fixing carbs and trading stories, his hands steady despite the arthritis gnawing at his knuckles. "Heard the talk already," he grunted, pouring coffee from a dented pot, the steam curling like ghosts in the dim light. You two playing heroes on Main Street. Town's buzzing like bees in a kicked hive. Marco snorted, leaning back against a rusted toolbox, his boots scuffing the floor. Wasn't playin'. Woman went down hard. No one else moved. His words carried a edge, not anger, but the quiet frustration of seeing the world spin on without a glance for the fallen. Harlan handed him a mug, the ceramic chipped from years of rough handling, and nodded toward Jax, who was staring at the open bay door, watching rivulets trace paths down the glass. Jax took the coffee without looking, the heat seeping through the mug into his palms. It burned a little. A welcome distraction from the image burned into his mind. Elena's pale face, the faint tremor in her fingers. "She's at County General now," he said finally, voice low, as if speaking louder might summon the doubts crowding his thoughts. "Paramedics said it looked like a heart thing, maybe exhaustion on top. We followed him there, waited in the hall till they stabilized her." The hospital had been a sterile blur, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the sharp scent of antiseptic cutting through the rain-soaked leather of their jackets. They'd stood in the waiting area, out of place among the fidgeting families and harried nurses, their presence drawing sidelong glances. A security guard had hovered nearby, radio crackling, but Jax ignored him, focusing on the double doors where Elena had disappeared. Marco had paced, his boots echoing on the linoleum, until a doctor emerged with clipped efficiency, stable, but critical. Dehydration? Possible arrhythmia? Family notified? No one had come forward. Just her purse, with an ID tucked inside. Elena Vasquez. Address a rundown apartment on the east side. Harlan sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing under bushy brows. Vasquez. Rings a bell. Works shifts at the diner down by the tracks, don't she? Quiet type. Keeps to herself. Husband skipped out years back. Left her with a kid or two. He set the mug down, the clink punctuating the rain's rhythm. Folks around here say she's tough, but life's been grinding her down. Factory laid off half the town last winter. She's been pulling doubles just to keep the lights on. Jax's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering under the stubble. He knew that grind all too well. The endless shift from one dead-end job to another after his own discharge. The nights staring at the ceiling while ghosts from the desert whispered. The Iron Hawks had pulled him through. Not with pity, but with the unspoken pact. You fall, we lift. No questions, no scorekeeping. But Elena? She was a stranger. Her collapse a crack in the facade of a town that pretended its edges weren't fraying. A door banged open at the far end of the garage, admitting Lena, the club's unofficial heart. A wiry woman in her 30s with tattooed arms, and a smile that cut through the gloom like sunlight on chrome. She'd joined the Hawks after her brother overdosed, finding solace in the rides and the rough camaraderie. Today, she carried a paper bag from the diner, grease spots blooming on the bottom. "Brought breakfast," she announced, setting it on the workbench. "Figured you'd be holed up here after that street show. Word's spreading, couple of roughnecks saving the day. Makes you almost respectable." Marco chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes as he rummaged for a sandwich. Lena turned to Jax, her gaze softening, reading the tension in his shoulders. "You okay? Look like you've seen a ghost." He met her eyes, the weight of the morning pressing down. "Reminds me of Maria," he admitted, the name slipping out like a confession. His sister, gone 5 years now, felled by a system that triaged the poor last. He'd been stateside then, too late to do more than hold her hand at the end. The guilt had ridden with him ever since, a shadow under the leather. "Can't let it happen again. Not if we're close enough to touch it." Lena nodded, no judgment in her silence, just the shared understanding of scars that didn't show. She unwrapped her own food, the crinkle of paper a small sound in the vastness of the garage. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle, turning the world soft and blurred. Harlan limped to a stool, easing down with a sigh. "Club meets tonight at the Roadhouse. We'll talk it through. But Jax, you and Marco did right. World's full of folks who look away. We don't." The afternoon wore on in the garage's rhythm, engines coughing to life under Marco's hands, sparks flying as Jax welded a fender, the acrid bite of metal filling the air. But conversation circled back to Elena, piecing together fragments from town whispers. She'd immigrated young, built a life in the shadows of Eldridge's mills, raising a daughter alone after her husband vanished into the bottle and beyond. The collapse? Maybe the final straw, a missed shift, a bill unpaid, the quiet desperation that built until it broke. As the light faded, casting long shadows across the oil-slicked floor, Jack stepped out for air, the damp clinging to his skin. The street beyond was emptying, headlights piercing the dusk like hesitant promises. He thought of Elena in that hospital bed, tubes snaking from her arms, alone unless someone bridged the gap. The Ironhawks weren't saviors by trade, but in the code etched into their rides, protection wasn't optional. It was the thin line between surviving and truly living. Marco joined him, lighting a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face, lined with the wear of roads unpaved. "What now?" he asked, exhaling smoke that mingled with the mist. Jack stared into the gathering dark, the hum of a distant train underscoring the quiet. "We check on her, see if she needs anything. Brotherhood's not just for us." It was a decision, simple and profound, the first thread pulling them deeper into a story none of them had sought. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the first stars, fragile lights in a vast sky. In Eldridge, where judgments fell like judgments, two riders had chosen differently. And in that choice, the morning's spark began to smolder, hinting at fires yet to come. The evening settled over Eldridge like a heavy blanket, the kind that muffled sounds and blurred the edges of intent. Jax and Marco rode out from the garage as dusk deepened, their Harleys cutting through the cooling air with a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through their bones. The town lights flickered on one by one, neon signs from the diner, the hazy glow of street lamps casting pools of yellow on the wet pavement. They headed toward County General, not in a rush, but with the deliberate pace of men who knew waiting could change everything. Jax's mind wandered to the hospital's waiting room earlier that day, the way the nurse had eyed them like intruders, her clipboard a shield against the leather and ink that marked them as outsiders. Marco rode point now, his taillight a red beacon weaving through the sparse traffic. He glanced in his mirror, catching Jax's distant expression, the wind whipping at the loose ends of his hair. No words passed between them over the roar. They didn't need to. The Brotherhood was built on these silences, the shared language of roads traveled and burdens carried without tally. Elena's face lingered in Marco's thoughts, too. The vulnerability in her eyes when they'd lifted her jacket under her head. A fleeting connection amid the strangers. He'd grown up in a house where help was a luxury, his mother working nights at a factory that chewed up dreams and spat out exhaustion. Seeing Elena collapse had cracked something in him, a reminder that the world's indifference wasn't abstract. It was a choice, repeated daily. The hospital loomed on the hill, a squat concrete fortress lit by floodlights that washed out the stars. They parked in the visitor lot, engines dying with a final cough, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant beeps from inside. Jack swung off his bike, zipping his jacket against the chill that seeped from the ground. A security guard nodded warily from the entrance, his hand resting near his belt, but said nothing as they passed. Inside, the lobby smelled of stale coffee and bleach, the fluorescent hum a constant undercurrent. Jax approached the desk, his boots echoing softly on the tile. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, looked up, her gaze sharpening at the sight of them. "We're here for Elena Vasquez," Jack said, his voice even, laced with the gravel of restraint. "Brought her in this morning. Just want to check if she's up for visitors." The woman tapped at her keyboard, lips pursing. "Family only after hours," she replied. But there was a hesitation, a flicker of recognition from the morning's reports. Whispers had already filtered through the staff grapevine, the bikers who'd jumped in when no one else did. She glanced at Marco, who stood a step back, arms loose at his sides, exuding a quiet vigilance. "Wait here, I'll see." Minutes stretched as they sat on the hard plastic chairs, the room sparse save for a vending machine's glow and a faded poster about heart health. Jax's fingers drummed lightly on his knee, a rhythm born of old habits, counting breaths in the foxholes, waiting for the all clear. Marco pulled a worn deck of cards from his pocket, shuffling them absently, the soft slap of pasteboard a small anchor in the sterility. When the receptionist returned, her expression softened just a fraction. "She's stable. Room 214, but keep it short. She's weak." The elevator ride was a confined hum, the doors opening to a corridor lined with half-drawn curtains and the muffled murmur of monitors. Elena's room was dim, lit by the blue pulse of a screen tracking her vitals. She lay propped against pillows, an IV line trailing from her arm like a fragile tether, her face gaunt but color returning to her cheeks. A nurse adjusted the drip, nodding them in before slipping out. Elena's eyes opened wider at the sight of them, a mix of surprise and wariness crossing her features. She shifted slightly, wincing, her hand clutching the bedsheet. "You," she whispered, voice raspy from disuse. "The ones from the street." Jax pulled up a chair, the legs scraping faintly. "Yeah. Name's Jax. This is Marco. How you feeling?" She managed a small nod, her gaze drifting to the window where rain began to patter again, streaking the glass. "Like I got hit by a truck, doctors say. Irregular heartbeat, exhaustion. Been a long time coming, I guess." Her words trailed off, heavy with the unsaid. The shifts at the diner stacking up, the daughter waiting at home with empty cupboards. Elena's eyes met Jax's, searching, as if weighing whether to trust the men who'd appeared from the haze like unlikely guardians. Marco stayed by the door, leaning against the frame, his presence a silent ward. "No family came?" he asked gently, the question hanging like smoke. Elena's lips trembled, a hand rising to tuck a strand of graying hair behind her ear. "Daughter's with a neighbor. She's 12. Sarah, husband's long gone. It's just us." The confession spilled out, raw and unpolished, the isolation of her life laid bare in the room's quiet. Jax felt it echo his own losses, the way solitude could hollow you out until a single fall broke everything. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "We can help get word to her. Or bring her here if you need." Her eyes welled, but she blinked it back, a fierce glint surfacing. "Why?" "You don't know me. Folks around here. They see your kind and cross the street." The words weren't accusation, just truth, born of a town that painted the Iron Hawks in broad strokes of suspicion. Rumors of rough justice, shadows in the night. Jax's hand stilled, the weight of judgment familiar as an old scar. "We know what it's like to be looked past. Club's about more than the road. About showing up." He paused, the air thick with the beeps and breaths. "Sarah needs her mom. We'll make sure she gets home okay tonight." Tears escaped then, tracing silent paths down Elena's cheeks, her hand reaching out to grasp Jax's forearm, a tentative bridge across the divide. Marco stepped closer, his voice soft. "Rest now. We'll handle the rest." In that moment, the room felt charged, not with tension, but with the quiet power of connection, a thread weaving through the barriers of stereotype and solitude. They left the hospital with a plan unspoken but solid. Track down the neighbor, ensure Sarah was fed and safe, maybe leave some cash for the fridge. The rain slicked the parking lot as they mounted their bikes, engines growling to life under the sodium lights. Jax glanced back at the building, a silhouette against the storm clouds, feeling the shift in his chest, the isolation cracking, compassion seeping in like light through blinds. Marco revved beside him, a nod passing between them, the brotherhood extending beyond leather and chrome. Back in town, the roadhouse awaited, a weathered beacon where the Ironhawks gathered under hanging bulbs in the scent of wood smoke. Harlan was already there, nursing a beer at the scarred bar, while Lena chatted with a couple of other riders. Rico, a burly mechanic with a laugh like thunder, and Quiet Tom, whose eyes held the ghosts of deployments long past. The jukebox hummed a low-country tune, guitars weaving through conversations about routes and repairs. Jax and Marco slid onto stools, the wood creaking under their weight. "She's stable," Jax said to the group, Harlan sliding over fresh drafts. "But alone. Daughter's just a kid." Lena's face tightened, empathy flashing. "We'll pitch in. Food, ride for the girl, whatever." The others murmured agreement, the code activating like a well-oiled machine. Protect your own, and those who become so in the moment. As the night deepened, stories flowed. Tales of past rides, interventions in shadowed towns. But Elena's threaded through them all, humanizing the what-ifs. Jax felt the evolution stir. From the lone wolf he'd been to this, a man tethered by choice to others' survival. The rain drummed on the tin roof, a rhythmic underscore to the loyalty blooming in the dim light. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The night at the roadhouse stretched into a haze of low voices and flickering shadows, the kind that made confessions feel safer under the cover of dim light. Jax nursed his beer, the condensation beating cold against his fingers, as the group's talk circled Elena like smoke from Rico's cigar. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and spilled whiskey, the jukebox now silent, replaced by the patter of rain resuming outside. Lena leaned on the bar, her tattooed fingers tracing the edge of her glass, eyes thoughtful. "That girl's 12, you say?" "Reminds me of my niece back home. World's no place for a kid alone." Jax nodded, the weight of Elena's words from the hospital lingering like a bruise. Sarah, small, waiting in some neighbor's cramped living room, probably with a sandwich and questions her mom couldn't answer yet. He'd volunteered to ride over first thing, but the unease gnawed at him, a quiet warning that good intentions in Eldridge often drew lines in the sand. The town had its ways. Whispers turning to stares, judgments hardening into barriers. The Ironhawks knew it well. They'd been the villains in local tales for years, their leather vests a shorthand for trouble in a place that clung to its illusions of safety. Marco broke the silence, setting his empty bottle down with a deliberate clink. "Neighbor's name is Mrs. Ellis, from what the nurse said. Lives 2 blocks from the diner. We swing by at dawn, get eyes on the kid, bring her to see Elena if she's up for it." His voice was steady, but Jax caught the flicker in his eyes, the same one that had appeared on the street. A mix of resolve and the old fear of overstepping into someone else's mess. Marco had lost his own father young, to a bar brawl that left more questions than closure, and the idea of a child adrift pulled at threads he'd long tried to bury. Harlan cleared his throat, his limp more noticeable as he shifted on the stool. "Careful, boys. Town's already chattering. Saw a couple of uniforms eyeballing the garage this afternoon. Probably just routine, but after that street stunt, folks might spin it wrong. Bikers meddling in family business." He spat the last words, not with venom, but the weariness of a man who'd fought those assumptions his whole life. The Ironhawks weren't criminals. They were the ones who fixed what the law overlooked, delivering supplies to flood victims, standing watch over a widow's farm when debts came calling. But perception was a cruel rider, faster than truth. Jax felt the tension coil in his chest, a familiar ache from deployments where trust was the first casualty. He pushed back from the bar, the stool scraping like a reluctant admission. "Let him talk. We don't answer to whispers." But even as he said it, doubt flickered. Elena's wariness in the hospital bed, the way her hand had trembled on his arm. Trust wasn't given. It was earned in the quiet spaces between actions. He stepped outside for air, the rain-slicked porch creaking under his boots. The parking lot was a sea of gleaming chrome under the security light, puddles reflecting the neon from the roadhouse sign. Marco followed, lighting another cigarette, the flame casting brief shadows on his face. "You think she's got more going on?" Marco asked, exhaling slowly, the smoke curling into the mist. That collapse didn't look random. Eyes like hers, haunted, like she's carrying ghosts. Jax leaned against a post, the damp wood rough against his palm. Memories surfaced unbidden. His sister's final days, the unpaid bills stacking like accusations. The way exhaustion had hollowed her out until one night she simply didn't wake. Everyone's carrying something. Question is, do we walk away clean or dig in? It was the moral fork they'd faced before, intervene and risk the backlash, or ride on, preserving the fragile peace of their own lives. The Brotherhood had taught him the cost of silence, but compassion came with its own scars. Dawn broke gray and reluctant, the sky a bruised canvas as Jax and Marco rolled toward Mrs. Ellis's place. The neighborhood was a row of sagging porches and chain-link fences, the kind of street where hope patched roofs but couldn't fix the cracks beneath. They killed the engines a block away, walking the rest to avoid startling anyone. The house was a faded blue bungalow, curtains twitching as they approached. Jax knocked, the sound hollow against the door, his heart thudding in rhythm with the distant train whistle. Mrs. Ellis answered cautiously, a wiry woman in her 60s with curlers in her hair and a robe clutched tight. Her eyes widened at the sight of them, 2 towers of leather and stubble on her stoop. But she didn't slam the door. "Elena?" she said, voice pitched low, glancing over her shoulder. "She's stable at the hospital," Jax replied, keeping his tone even, hands visible at his sides. "We're the ones who helped her this morning. Came to check on Sarah, make sure she's okay." The woman's face softened fractionally, relief warring with suspicion. "Poor thing's been worried sick. Cried herself to sleep last night after the neighbor called about the ambulance. Come in, but quiet. She's still out." Inside, the living room smelled of instant coffee and faded lavender, furniture worn from years of borrowed lives. Sarah was curled on the couch, a blanket pulled to her chin, her dark hair spilling like Elena's. She stirred at the voices, eyes fluttering open, wide, uncertain, but not afraid. Marco hung back, his bulk filling the doorway, while Jax knelt to her level. "Hey, kid, your mom's asking for you. She's tough, like you. Want us to take you to see her?" Sarah sat up slowly, clutching a stuffed bear worn thin at the edges. "You know my mom?" Her voice was small, threaded with the exhaustion of too many unknowns. Jax nodded, a gentleness softening his features. "Met her yesterday. She's resting, but she needs her girl." He didn't mention the monitors or the fragility. Some truths were for later. Mrs. Ellis bustled in the kitchen, packing a small bag with snacks, her movements brisk but kind. "These boys saved her, Sarah, don't you forget that." The ride to the hospital was slow, Sarah sandwiched between them on Jax's bike, her arms tentative around his waist. The engines hum a soothing lullaby against the morning chill. Marco led, his presence a shield through the waking streets. Eldridge stirred, shop owners flipping signs, a few stares following their convoy. But no one interfered. At the hospital, Elena's face lit when Sarah rushed in. The reunion a quiet flood of tears and whispers, hands clasping like lifelines. Jax and Marco waited outside the room, the corridor's hush amplifying their thoughts. "This could get messy," Marco murmured, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "If the town's got eyes on us now." Jax met his gaze, the decision settling like dust after a ride. Then we face it. No one's alone in this. The words carried the weight of evolution, isolation giving way to the pull of shared humanity. But as a nurse passed with a tray of instruments, her glance lingering too long, Jax sensed the tension rising. A whisper of conflict on the horizon, where loyalty would be tested not just by the road, but by the shadows of judgment closing in. In the hours that followed, word spread through the hospital corridors like veins of light through fog. Elena held Sarah close, her strength returning in small measures, the color in her cheeks, the steadiness of her voice as she promised better days. But outside, in the parking lot where the bikes waited like faithful sentinels, Jax felt the first stirrings of unease. A pickup truck idled nearby, its driver watching too intently, the engine's idle a low threat. Eldridge had its protectors, but also its gatekeepers, and the Iron Hawk's involvement had crossed an invisible line. Compassion had bridged one gap, but it threatened to widen others, pulling them toward a confrontation where silence was no longer an option. The midday sun hung low over Eldridge, casting long shadows that stretched like accusations across the hospital parking lot. Jax wiped sweat from his brow, the air thick with the scent of hot asphalt and distant exhaust, as he and Marco lingered by their bikes. Sarah's laughter echoed faintly from inside, a fragile sound cutting through the tension that had settled like dust after a skid. The pickup truck still idled at the lot's edge, its driver, a stocky man in a faded cap, now turning away, tires crunching gravel as he pulled out slowly. Jax's eyes narrowed, tracking the vehicle until it merged with the traffic on the highway. No plates he could make out, but the deliberate stare lingered in his mind, a warning etched in the ordinary. Marco shifted beside him, his boots scuffing the pavement, the chain on his wallet jingling softly. "Trouble?" he asked, voice low, the kind of murmur that carried the weight of shared instincts honed on back roads and barroom edges. Jax shook his head, but the knot in his gut tightened. Maybe. Or just the town's way of reminding us we're not welcome. He glanced back at the hospital doors, where a nurse wheeled a cart past, her gaze sliding over them with practiced neutrality. Inside, Elena was weaving stories for Sarah, small tales of better times, her hand stroking the girl's hair, the IV stand a silent sentinel. It was a moment Jax envied, the quiet mending of what life had frayed. But out here, the world pressed in, indifferent and watchful. They rode back to the garage in formation, the engine's rumble a barrier against the stares from passing cars. Eldridge unfolded around them, the diner with its steamed windows, the factory gates chained shut like forgotten promises, boarded-up shops whispering of harder days. Jax felt the evolution pulling at him, from the solitary rides of his early club days to this, tethered now to a stranger's survival, the compassion a double-edged blade that cut deeper than isolation ever had. Marco rode close, their shadows merging on the road, a silent affirmation of the bond that no judgment could sever. The garage was alive with activity when they arrived, tools clanging like distant thunder, the air sharp with solvent and welding sparks. Harlan waved them in from under a truck's undercarriage, his face smudged with grease, eyes sharp despite the strain. Lena was there too, sorting parts on a cluttered shelf, her movements efficient, but her expression clouded. "Heard from Rico," she said without preamble, wiping her hands on a rag that left streaks on her jeans. "Town's heating up. Couple of locals at the diner this morning, talking about how you two interfered with Elena. Said she's one of theirs to handle, like Charity's their private game." Jax's jaw clenched, the rag in his hand twisting tighter. He thought of the street that morning, the passers-by who'd stepped around her like she was litter, and rage simmered low. A contained fire, banked by years of learning that fury unchecked led only to chains. Interfered? They left her in the gutter. His voice was steady, but Marco caught the tremor, the way his friend's fists balled at his sides, knuckles whitening against the dark ink of old tattoos. Harlan emerged from the truck, wiping his brow with a forearm, the limp pulling him upright slowly. It's more than talk, boys. Word is Eddie Klein's stirring it. Runs that crew down by the tracks. Small-time muscle for the old mill owners. Elena's behind on rent. He's the one breathing down her neck. Thinks your involvement makes him look weak, like outsiders are poaching his leverage. The name landed heavy. Jax knew Klein by reputation, a bully in flannel, the kind who profited from desperation, collecting debts with veiled threats and broken promises. The Ironhawks had crossed paths with his type before, in dusty towns where justice wore a badge or a fist, but never so close to their own fragile peace. Marco paced to the open bay door, staring out at the road where heat shimmered like regret. We back off. He squeezes harder. We push. It blows up. His words hung in the air, laced with the moral suspense that defined their lives, the choice between retreat and the storm. Lena stepped closer, her hand on his arm, a grounding touch amid the rising hum of uncertainty. Club's got your back, but we do this smart. No charging in blind. The afternoon dragged into confrontation's shadow. As the sun dipped, casting the garage in amber light, a knock echoed from the side entrance, sharp, insistent. Rico answered, his broad frame filling the doorway, and ushered in a figure Jax recognized from town glimpses. Mrs. Ellis, Sarah's neighbor, her face pale, hands twisting a dish towel like a lifeline. I didn't know where else to go, she said, voice quavering as she stepped inside, the scent of her soap clashing with the garage's oil. Eddie's boys were at my place not 10 minutes ago. Rough types, asking about Elena, about you all poking around. Said if I keep harboring Sarah, they'll make trouble. For her, for me. Jax's blood ran cold, the quiet compassion of the morning twisting into something fiercer. He gestured her to a stool, pouring water from a jug, the liquid splashing softly. What did they say exactly? His tone was calm, but inside, the veteran stirred, the one who'd learned to read threats in the tilt of a head, the pause before a strike. Mrs. Ellis sipped, her eyes darting to the group. Warned me to stay out. Called you those biker thugs stirring up what ain't yours. But Elena, she's good people. Sarah too. After what you did, I couldn't just sit. Tears welled, unbidden, her hand trembling as she set the glass down. The room fell silent, save for the distant tick of a cooling engine, the weight of her words binding them tighter. Marco exchanged a look with Jax, the decision crystallizing in that shared glance. No words, just the nod of brotherhood. We'll handle Klein, Jax said, helping her up, his grip steady on her elbow. Get Sarah from the hospital if Elena's okay with it. Keep her with you till this settles. As she left, the door clicking shut behind her, the garage felt smaller, charged with the escalation they'd sensed brewing. Dusk fell swiftly, painting the sky in bruised purples. The Ironhawks gathered in the back lot, bikes lined like soldiers under the floodlights. Harlan outlined a plan. Quiet reconnaissance on Klein's hangout by the tracks. No violence. Just presence to draw the line. Lena checked her watch, the glow illuminating her determined face. For Elena. For the kid. Rico and Tom murmured assent, the group a tapestry of scars and loyalties, compassion forged in the fire of marginal lives. Jax mounted his Harley last, the leather seat warm from the day's sun, but his heart raced with the risk. The road ahead twisted toward confrontation, where contained rage met the quiet code of protection. As they rolled out, engines harmonizing in the twilight, Jax felt the pull of redemption sharpening. From isolated rider to guardian, the moral arc bending under the weight of what must be done. But in the rear view, Eldridge's lights receded, a town divided, and the shadows lengthened, hinting at revelations yet to surface in the gathering dark. The engines thrummed low as the Ironhawks cut through the twilight, a convoy of shadows gliding along the cracked highway toward the tracks. Jax rode in the middle, the vibration of his Harley pulsing through his gloves like a second heartbeat, the wind carrying the faint metallic tang of the river nearby. The sky had deepened to indigo, stars pricking through like hesitant witnesses, and the air cooled against his skin, raising goose flesh under the leather. Marco flanked him on the left, his bike steady, while Harlan brought up the rear, the older man's machine rumbling with a gravelly undertone that spoke of miles uncounted. Lena and Rico led, their taillights winking red ahead, a signal in the gathering dark. No one spoke over the roar. Words would have been swallowed anyway. But Jax felt the collective resolve, a quiet current binding them, the kind forged in late-night rides after losses no one named. Elena's face flickered in his mind, pale against the hospital pillow, her hand on Sarah's as they'd left the room earlier, a fragile piece he'd helped stitch. Now, this ride twisted toward something sharper, the compassion of the morning hardening into the necessity of confrontation. Eddie Klein's crew hung out in a derelict warehouse by the rails, a rusting hulk where deals soured and debts turned venomous. Jax had never crossed Klein directly, but the man's reputation clung like oil. A local enforcer who squeezed the desperate, his protection a euphemism for chains. They slowed as the tracks came into view, the gravel lot crunching under tires, the distant click-clack of a freight train underscoring the hush. The warehouse squatted against the embankment, its corrugated sides scarred by graffiti and neglect, windows boarded like blind eyes. A few trucks were parked haphazardly, their hoods cooling with faint ticks, and cigarette smoke drifted from the open bay door where shadows moved. Jax killed his engine first, the silence rushing in like a held breath, amplifying the murmur of voices inside, low laughs, the clink of bottles. He swung off, boots sinking into the loose stones, his hand instinctively brushing the pocket where he kept a worn photo of Maria, edges frayed from too many touches. Marco dismounted beside him, his eyes scanning the perimeter, posture loose but alert, the bandana around his neck damp from the ride. 3, maybe 4 inside, he murmured, nodding toward the glow spilling from the door. Klein's truck, that black Ford with the dented fender. The group clustered, Lena's face set in quiet determination, her fingers flexing as if gripping invisible reins. Harlan hung back, his limp a shadow in the dim, but his gaze was steel. Presence first, he reminded, voice a rumble. No need for fists unless they force it. Draw the line. Make 'em see we're not backing off, Elena. Jax nodded, the plan simple. Enter calm, state their piece. Elena's off limits, debts or no, and leave before tempers ignited. But as they approached, the air thickened with the scent of stale beer and engine grease, a muffled argument spilling out. That waitress thinks she can hide behind biker trash? I'll drag the kid in myself if I have to. The voice was Klein's, oily and edged, followed by a chorus of chuckles that grated like sandpaper. Rage flickered in Jax's chest, contained, a slow burn honed from years of swallowing fire to keep the peace. They stepped into the light, the group's boots echoing on the concrete floor scarred by oil drums and discarded crates. 4 men turned, Klein at a makeshift table of sawhorses and plywood, his bulk slouched in a folding chair, a half-empty bottle in hand. His eyes narrowed, flicking over the iron hawks with the calculation of a man used to smaller fish. 2 others lounged nearby, flannel shirts rumpled, faces flushed. The 4th hovered by a cooler, hand pausing mid-reach. Evening, Jax said, voice even, stopping a respectful distance away. The air hummed with tension, the train's whistle piercing the distance like a warning. Heard you're leaning on Elena Vasquez. She's down, needs space. Debts wait, people don't. Klein's laugh was short, bark-like, but his eyes hardened, chair creaking as he leaned forward. Who the hell are you to tell me about her business? Town's mine to keep order. You leathernecks swoop in like heroes stirring shit, That collapse? Her own damn fault, skipping payments, playing victim. He gestured vaguely, the motion sloshing beer, but Jax caught the flicker in his gaze, the unease at the unexpected audience. The others shifted, hands twitching toward pockets, the room's shadows lengthening under the bare bulb swinging overhead. Marco stepped up, his presence a wall, voice low and steady. We were there when she fell. No one else was. You push now, you push us. Walk away clean. It wasn't a threat, just truth, laced with the quiet compassion that had started this. The image of Sarah's wide eyes, Elena's trembling grasp. Lena's hand rested near her hip, not aggressive, but ready, her empathy for the broken woman fueling the stand. Klein rose slowly, chair scraping like a reluctant surrender, his face twisting into a sneer that didn't reach his eyes. You think a few rides scare me? Elena owes, and I'll collect, kid or no kid. But the words faltered, the group's unyielding stares pressing in, the brotherhood of force beyond brawn, loyalty etched in silences, in the scars they wore openly. One of his men muttered something, a hand rising in half-hearted signal, but Klein waved it down, the air thick with the unspoken. This wasn't worth the blaze. Lines drawn, Jack said finally, holding Klein's gaze, the moral weight settling like rain on dust. Cross it, and the Hawks ride for her. All the way. No more words. They turned as one, boots echoing retreat, the night air cool on their faces as they emerged. Engines fired up behind them, a chorus of resolve. But Jax's pulse thrummed with the cost. The escalation they'd invited. The shadows now longer. Back at the garage, the group debriefed under the fluorescent hum, rain starting again in soft patters on the roof. Harlan poured coffee, steam rising like unspoken fears. He'll stew on it, he said, handing mugs around. But you bought her time. Lena nodded, but her eyes met Jax's, reading the introspection there, the way isolation had cracked, compassion pulling him toward redemption's edge. Marco lit a smoke outside, exhaling into the mist, the confrontation a mirror to his own buried guilts. As midnight neared, Jax sat alone by the bay door, staring at the road's gleam. The stand had been necessary, but it unearthed something deeper. Whispers from town contacts filtering in via Lena's phone. Elena's husband hadn't just left. He'd crossed Klein years back, a debt tangled in old betrayals. And Jax? A name from his past echoed faintly, a connection waiting to surface, redefining the stranger he'd saved as kin in ways he couldn't yet grasp. The rain whispered on, washing the night, but the tension coiled tighter, promising revelations that would test the heart of the ride. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena reach more people who still believe in humanity. The rain had turned relentless by midnight, sheets of it slamming against the garage roof like accusations unspoken. Jax paced the oil-stained floor, the echo of his boots a hollow rhythm in the dim light, cast by a single hanging bulb. The confrontation at the warehouse lingered in his muscles, a taut wire humming with the aftermath. Klein's sneer, the flicker of retreat in his eyes, the way his crew had hung back like dogs on a short leash. It had bought Elena time, but Jax knew men like that didn't yield ground without circling back, fangs bared. He stopped at the workbench, fingers tracing the edge of a wrench, cool metal grounding the storm in his chest. Maria's photo peeked from his pocket, her smile faded but fierce, a reminder of debts unpaid and lives cut short by indifference. Marco slumped in a folding chair nearby, nursing a lukewarm coffee, steam long gone. His face was etched with the wear of the ride, shadows pooling under his eyes. "He'll come at us sideways," he said, voice low, breaking the hush. "Not tonight, too wet for games, but soon." Words out. Lena's got ears at the diner saying Klein's raging, calling us interlopers in his territory. The words hung heavy, laced with the quiet rage they both felt, not explosive, but a slow seep, like oil into cracks. Jax nodded, the motion tight, his mind drifting to the hospital, to Sarah's tentative trust as she'd clung to him on the bike, her small frame warm against his back. Protecting her felt right, instinctive, but it stirred the old guilt, the what-ifs of his own daughter, lost to a custody battle after his discharge, her mother's voice sharp over the phone. "You're no father. You're a ghost on the road." Harlan limped in from the back, rain dripping from his jacket, pooling at his feet like dark secrets. He carried a thermos, pouring refills with hands that trembled only slightly. "Got a call from Tom. Scouts the tracks after we left. Klein's boys torched a trash barrel out back just to vent, but they're mobilizing. Talking payback. Maybe hitting the garage or Elena's place to send a message." His eyes met Jax's, steady despite the lines of age. "We stand firm, but smart. No lone wolves." The older man clapped a hand on Jax's shoulder, the grip firm, a silent anchor in the Brotherhood's code. Loyalty not as armor, but as the breath between falls. Dawn crept in gray and sodden, the world outside a blur of mist-shrouded streets. Jax rode out alone first, the Harley slicing through the downpour, water beating on his visor like tears held back. He headed to the hospital, the need to check on Elena pulling him like a tether. The lot was slick, puddles mirroring the overcast sky, and as he parked, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A sedan idling across the street, wipers slashing rhythmically. No clear plates in the rain, but the silhouette inside felt deliberate, watchful. Jax's pulse quickened, hand flexing on the handlebars, but he pushed it down, striding through the automatic doors with the scent of wet leather trailing him. The corridor to Elena's room was quieter now, monitors beeping in soft cadence, the air thick with antiseptic and underlying worry. Sarah slept in a pull-out chair beside the bed, her chest rising evenly, a stuffed bear tucked under her arm. Elena looked up as he entered, her face less gaunt, but shadows lingered under her eyes, the IV a persistent reminder of fragility. "You came back," she said softly, voice raspy but warm, gesturing him to the empty chair. Her hand rested on Sarah's hair, fingers threading gently, a gesture that twisted something deep in Jax's chest, echoes of moments he'd never reclaim. "Couldn't stay away," he replied, sitting carefully, the plastic creaking under his weight. "How's she holding up?" But his eyes flicked to the window, where rain streaked the glass, blurring the world outside. Elena followed his gaze, a tremor in her lips. "Better than me. Doctors say I can go home tomorrow if the tests clear. But Klein. He came by the diner last week, left a note, said the rent's due or Sarah pays the price." Her words cracked, tears welling but unshed, the confession spilling like the rain beyond. Jax leaned forward, elbows on knees, the closeness bridging the gap between stranger and confidant. "We handled him last night, told him to back off, but if he pushes, the Hawks push harder." Elena's eyes searched his, surprise mingling with gratitude, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. A light pressure, electric in its trust. "Why risk it? For us?" The question hung, raw, exposing the moral chasm. The town's judgment painting him as brute, while here, in this sterile light, he was simply a man offering shelter. Jax swallowed, the weight of his past pressing in. Lost someone once. Sister. System let her slip. Can't watch it happen again. He paused, the air thick with shared silence, the beep of the monitor underscoring the vulnerability. Elena's gaze softened, a flicker of recognition dawning. "Vasquez. My maiden name was Reyes, from the old neighborhood in San Diego, before the move." The name hit Jax like a skid on wet pavement, time fracturing in that instant. Reyes, Maria's married name, briefly, before the divorce that shattered everything. His sister had spoken of a cousin, Elena, lost to the sprawl of years and miles, a family tie frayed by distance and hardship. Jax's breath caught, hand stilling on the bedrail, the revelation uncoiling like a road unspooling in the rear view. Elena, you knew Maria? My sister? The words emerged hoarse, the pieces slamming together. The shared features in Sarah's face, the quiet strength echoing his siblings. Not strangers, but blood, diluted by time but binding now in crisis. Elena's eyes widened, tears spilling freely, her free hand covering her mouth. Jax. Little Jax from the block. God, Maria talked about you. Her baby brother, the one who enlisted to escape the grind. The room shrank, the rain a distant roar, as memories flooded. Backyard barbecues under string lights, laughter cutting the poverty. Maria's protective arm around a scrawny kid with dreams bigger than the streets. Jax's vision blurred, not from the storm outside, but the storm within. Mourning rekindled, compassion deepening into something familial, redemptive. He'd saved a cousin, unknowingly mending a tear in the fabric of loss. Sarah stirred then, blinking awake, sensing the shift. Mom. Elena pulled her close, whispering assurances, but her eyes stayed on Jax, gratitude laced with sorrow. Family, she murmured, the word a quiet vow. He stood, the chair scraping softly, emotion choking his throat. We'll keep you safe. All of you. Outside, the sedan was gone, but the tension lingered. Klein's shadow lengthening with the morning light. Jax mounted his bike, rain soaking through. But the revelation burned brighter, a truth exposing the humanity behind the leather, pulling him toward the confrontation's heart. Back at the garage, he shared it with Marco and the others, voices low amid the clatter of tools. The news rippled, strengthening resolve, but Harlan's warning cut through. Klein won't care about blood. He'll hit where it hurts. As noon approached, a call came. Mrs. Ellis, voice panicked. Klein's crew circling her block, tires screeching threats. The Hawks mobilized, engines roaring against the downpour, Jax at the lead, the moral arc bending toward justice's edge. Isolation shattered. He rode not as a lone guardian, but as kin reclaiming what time had stolen. The road ahead fraught with risk, but lit by loyalty's unyielding glow. The downpour hammered the streets of Eldridge like a relentless judgment, turning the roads into rivers of mud and memory. Jax gunned his Harley through the spray, the engine's roar a defiant pulse against the storm, water sluicing off his visor and sheets. Marco rode tight on his flank, their bikes slicing through the chaos, headlights cutting fragile paths in the gray. Behind them, the rest of the Ironhawks followed, Lena's machine humming fierce, Harlan steady, despite the limp he'd carry to his grave, Rico and Tom forming the rear guard. The call from Mrs. Ellis had ignited the fuse. Klein's crew, 3 trucks strong, prowling her block like wolves scenting weakness, tires splashing threats as they circled the bungalow where Sarah sheltered. Jax's mind raced with the revelation still fresh. Elena, his cousin, blood tied through Maria's laughter in sun-baked yards long faded. It wasn't just protection now. It was reclamation, a moral stand sharpened by the ache of years lost to silence. The neighborhood emerged through the veil of rain, porches sagging under the assault, lights flickering like hesitant beacons. Jack spotted the trucks first, black hulks idling at the corner, exhaust mingling with the mist, shadows shifting inside. Mrs. Ellis's house glowed faintly, curtains drawn tight, but a child's face pressed briefly against the glass. Sarah, eyes wide with the terror of the unknown. Jax's chest tightened, a father's ghost stirring unbidden, the daughter he'd never fully known flashing in his thoughts like lightning. He killed the engine a half block out, the sudden quiet amplifying the rain's tattoo, and waved the group to halt. No charges, no blaze. The code demanded precision. compassion wrapped in steel. "Flank 'em," Jax murmured to Marco, voice barely audible over the deluge. "We talk first. For Elena. For family." Marco nodded, water dripping from his bandana, his stance a mirror of restrained fury. The young rider who'd once watched his mother break under similar shadows. They split, Lena and Rico veering left toward the alley, Harlan and Tom holding the rear with bikes as barriers. Jax and Marco advanced on foot, boots splashing through puddles that reflected fractured streetlights, the air thick with the ozone bite of storm and tension. Klein leaned against his truck's hood as they approached, rain plastering his shirt to his frame, a smirk twisting his lips despite the downpour. 2 of his men flanked him, one cracking knuckles, the other clutching a tire iron loose at his side, signs of struggle implied in the glint of metal, the coiled readiness. The 3rd truck idled empty, its driver vanished into the shadows, perhaps scouting Mrs. Ellis's back door. "Back for round 2, biker?" Klein called, voice oily through the rain, wiping water from his eyes. "This ain't your turf. Elena's debt's mine. Old score from her deadbeat husband. You meddle, it gets ugly for the kid." Jack stopped 10 feet out, rain streaming down his face like unshed tears, his leather jacket heavy as armor. The moral fork loomed stark. Walk away, preserve the fragile peace, or draw the line with the weight of blood behind it. Maria's voice echoed faintly. Forgive the lost, protect the living, and compassion surged, not as weakness, but the quiet fire that bound the Hawks. Husband's gone. Elena's family to us. You push on her, on Sarah, you push the brotherhood. Debts die, harm doesn't. His words cut clean, no bluster. Just the raw truth of a man evolved from isolation, his trembling hand betraying the emotion coiled tight. Marco shifted beside him, a low growl escaping, but Jax raised a palm. Stay the rage, let justice whisper first. Klein laughed, but it rang hollow, rain masking the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The man with the tire iron stepped forward, muscles bunching, but Lena's voice sliced from the alley. Easy, boys. We got eyes on your ride. Torched like that barrel last night? Her tone was calm, laced with the empathy of one who'd scraped bottom, now standing tall for the fallen. Rico's shadow loomed behind, a contained force. Klein's crew hesitated, the storm amplifying their isolation, the Hawks' unity a wall no single storm could breach. The enforcer lunged then, tire iron whistling through the air, a muffled arc ending in Marco's block, the clash of metal on arm a dull thud that sent vibrations up Jax's spine. No gore, just the implication of pain in Marco's grunt, the way he twisted and shoved, sending the man sprawling into the mud. Jax moved on Klein, grabbing his collar not to strike, but to pull close, faces inches apart under the torrent. End it here, walk away, or we ride till your crew scatters. Klein's breath hitched, eyes darting to his men scrambling up, Lena's group closing in like a noose of loyalty. The moral turn crested. Klein's sneer cracked, hands rising in surrender, the bully's facade crumbling under the weight of witnessed compassion. Call him off, Jax said, releasing him, stepping back as the rain washed the tension away. Klein barked orders, trucks revving to life, tires spinning mud as they fled into the gray. The street fell silent, save for the downpour, the Hawks converging, breaths heavy, hands clapping shoulders in quiet triumph. No victory cheers, just the hush of redemption earned, the Brotherhood's code proven in the mud. They escorted Mrs. Ellis and Sarah to the hospital under escort, bikes flanking the old sedan like guardians. Elena's room filled with relieved tears, Sarah's arms around her mother, Jack standing sentinel by the door, Marco nursing a bruised arm with a faint smile. Family, Elena whispered again, her gaze on Jack's locking the revelation. Cousins reunited in crisis, humanity unveiled behind the leather. The Hawks lingered, sharing coffee in the waiting area, stories weaving through the night. Harlan's tales of old rides, Lena's quiet vow to help with bills, the community mending what society frayed. As dawn broke, pale light filtering through the rain-streaked windows, Jax stepped out to the lot, the air fresh with petrichor and possibility. The confrontation had passed, Klein's shadow retreating, debts renegotiated in the wake of the stand. Isolation had dissolved into this. Compassion's quiet justice, loyalty's enduring hum. He mounted his bike, engine purring to life, the road ahead clear, carrying the weight of forgiveness and the light of hearts still beating. In the end, the engines faded into the distance, leaving behind a town forever changed by the courage to see beyond the storm. A reminder that true strength lies in the hands that lift, not the fists that fall. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of She Collapsed in the Street, saved only by 2 Iron Hawks bikers. See you in the next one.